Hello, my name is Susan Tsai. It's my pleasure on behalf of the Association of Women Surgeons and the Society of Asian Academic Surgeons to share this profile of Dr. Yusu Margaret Lee and her lifetime of service to surgery and the military. I have no disclosures. I would like to say a special thank you to her son Maxwell Lee for sharing her story with me, and as well as these photos, and also to Dr. Kenrick Murayama for his insights. So there's a Chinese saying that a lotus flower blooms most beautifully from the deepest and thickest mud, or alternatively, a flower that blooms in adversity is the most rare and beautiful of all. Keep this in mind as I tell you about Dr. Lee's journey. So Dr. Lee was born in Shan, China. Her father was a lawyer and her mother was a high school teacher. She had 5 other brothers and sisters. And when she was 5, her family had to flee the area when the Japanese occupied China. She and her family lived through the Nanjing massacre, where approximately 300,000 Chinese were killed over the course of 6 weeks. During this time, they fled to Songqing, and during this time of war, unfortunately, 3 of her older siblings died of dysentery. As a young child, she remembers her mother saying that these children were dying because of lack of access to doctors. And it was this which really motivated her from a very young age to become determined to become a doctor. If living through a massacre were not enough, in 1949, her family was forced to flee to Taiwan during the Communist Revolution. And so her early years were marked by a significant amount of upheaval. Now, Dr. Lee grew up in the same generation as my own mother, and at this time, women were not routinely encouraged to be educated. And you can see the impact of this in Dr. Lee's class picture, where women only represented a small minority of the class. At the end of her secondary school education, her parents actually encouraged her to take up secretarial work, but she rebelled and was convinced that she could become a doctor and applied to college. A little bit to everyone's surprise, she was accepted into the National Taiwan University, which is the top university in Taiwan. Unfortunately, her family, because of all of their adversities, could not afford to support her education there for more than a year. At that time, she actually received some additional support from the Catholic missionary, which sponsored her to complete her education in the United States. And so in 1955, she actually emigrated to South Dakota on a scholarship and completed her undergraduate education there. She continued to excel academically, and she applied to Harvard Medical School. She was actually accepted on a full scholarship as only one of 4 women in a class of 90. And she then, 4 years later, graduated from Harvard Medical School cum laude. During her clerkship at Boston's Children's Hospital, she recounts seeing a baby with gastroschisis. She realized then that nature can make mistakes and that surgery can actually correct these mistakes. And at that time, she stated that she really became determined not only to become a physician or a doctor, but also to become a surgeon. As you can imagine, it's very uncommon for women, much less an underrepresented minority, to be trained in general surgery. There were no surgical training programs in Boston that had ever accepted a woman at that time. But she knew Dr. C. Gardner Child, who was the chair of surgery at Tufts. He, at that point, was moving to the University of Michigan to assume a chair position there, and she applied to that residency program and was accepted. When she joined the University of Michigan, she was the only woman in the entire Department of Surgery, including trainees and faculty. While in Ann Arbor, she met her husband and got married. Unfortunately, she suffered a series of miscarriages, which ultimately required hospitalizations. And as you can imagine, with general surgery training at that time and the parental program, she was asked to transition to research. She instead transferred her final 2 years of residency to the University of Missouri, Columbia, where she completed her surgical residency and then went on to complete a clinical fellowship in surgical oncology as well. It said that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and so begins Dr. Lee's westward migration. Following her training, she was retained as an assistant professor at the University of Missouri until 1973, when she was recruited to the University of Southern California as an associate professor and head of the tumor surgery service. While she was at LA County Hospital, because of the high volume of penetrating trauma that was seen there, residents from other training programs, including Tripler Army Hospital in Hawaii, also rotated through. And so she began to develop a reputation both within the continent and abroad. She recounts dealing with some professional frustrations, coming up against both gender and racial bias, which led her to pursue additional opportunities. And so in 1983, she became the chief of surgical oncology at Tripler Army Medical Hospital in Honolulu, Hawaii. When she joined Tripler, she was assigned as the coordinator and facilitator of the scholarly endeavors and educational program for the general surgery service. In addition, she was the officer in charge of the emergency medical team. Shortly after her joining Tripler, within 6 years, she was promoted from lieutenant colonel to colonel. And when she was asked about how the military hospitals differ from civilian facilities, she remarked, 1, we wear uniforms. 2, we have a daily morning meeting and share all information, so there are no private patients. And 3, the physicians have to pass an Army physical readiness test twice a year. So out of curiosity, I looked up what this test is. It's 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. So never to do things in half measures, Dr. Lee decided that she not only wanted to meet the demands of the test, but to crush it. So she actually trained for a marathon, and she ran her first marathon in 1984, and then wrote about the experience. As if this were not enough, she would go on to run another 16 marathons in total. So in 1990, she volunteered for a tour of duty as part of the Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Her son Max shared with me that she volunteered because she was the only surgeon at Tripler who was senior enough to have an adult child, and she felt it was her duty to represent Tripler. So she was deployed to northern Saudi Arabia as a general surgeon with the 13th Evacuation Hospital, the 332nd Medical Brigade, and the 7th Army Corps. You can see Lieutenant Colonel at the time, Lee, with all her gear. When she was there, they built a 400-bed hospital with 3 operating rooms. She cared for both soldiers as well as prisoners of war. And fitting with her desire to help all people, you can see that during her time there, she planted a peace garden at the base. Following the war, she was promoted to the rank of colonel. And for those of you who are not familiar with military ranking, the next highest ranking is a 1-star general. And she was awarded the Proficiency A designator, which designates the highest level of professional accomplishment within the Army Medical Department. Unfortunately, in 1999, Colonel Lee was involved in a serious motor accident that required a prolonged ICU stay and multiple reconstructive surgeries. Following her accident, she retired from the U.S. Army, but remained active as a clinical professor of surgery at the University of Hawaii. She felt that she still had much to give and began a new phase in her career in what we would now call global surgery. She partnered with a medical missionary called SMART, which stands for Surgical Medical Aid Relief Teams. And the goal of this organization is to provide healthcare services to children in low-income countries. For the next 8 years, she would travel the world to care for underserved populations. In this capacity, she served as a leader of the Sino-American Surgical Tour Group to the People's Republic of China. She led the Hawaiian Medical Mission to China and was a leader of the women's delegation to Russia and Romania. She would continue to teach surgery at Tsuchi University and Medical Center in Hualien, Taiwan, 4 times a year. And in addition, she participated in medical missions to Ghana, Honduras, Cambodia, Laos, and the Philippines. In 2019, she was awarded the ACS Mary Edward Walker Inspiring Women in Surgery Award for her lifetime of service. This is particularly meaningful as Dr. Walker was the first female surgeon of the U.S. Army, and like Colonel Lee, was a woman before her time. Not only was she a surgeon, but a suffragist and as well as an abolitionist, and she was the only woman to ever have received the Presidential Medal of Honor. So in closing, I hope I captured a small part of the great life of Colonel Margaret Lee. There's a Chinese proverb that a man, or a woman in this case, grows tired while standing still. You can see that Colonel Lee's life has been inspiring and has been dedicated to improving the lot of her fellow human beings, both near and far. I'm sorry that she cannot join us for this session, but I think these photos capture the energy and spirit of this amazing woman. Thank you.